investing. Richard is a 25-year veteran in the tech space, leading the Sharesies team through the deployment of AI in their offering at the moment. So I'll get us started with just a quick overview of what AI is. I'm by no means an expert, and I'm sure, as already there's a few different ways you can break this down, and our experts will dive into that a little bit later, but we'll try to keep it simple to begin with. So artificial intelligence, or AI, involves machines perform tasks that usually require human intelligence, such as learning and problem solving. Although AI has been around for some time, recent advancements have significantly increased its power and prevalence. Earlier AI models were often specialized sequences based on rule-based approaches, such as Netflix recommendations or playing chess against a computer. These models interpreted data and made predictions based on a specific set of rules. But today we'll focus on what's called generative AI. Unlike traditional AI, which mainly analyzes existing data, generative AI uses deep learning techniques to create something new, and this means that it can write text, generate images, compose music, or even write code. Tools like ChatGPT rely on an AI architecture called a transformer. T means, or stands for, generative pre-trained transformer. The architecture understands the relationships between words in a sentence and uses this understanding to generate coherent responses to the prompts that you provide based on large data sets that it was trained on. Ultimately, this means that the AI doesn't necessarily understand the text in the way a human would, but rather is using complex pattern recognition to read and respond. And again, these things are really so black and white. This is a very simplified explanation, and there's so much depth that you can explore about how these systems work. Today, we're going to focus on the consideration for value-led businesses like B Corps when assessing generative AI for your businesses. As with most tech advancements, there are great opportunities as well as the potential for bad actors to leverage it in harmful ways, not to mention the environmental impact of increased e-waste and computing power. So that's why we brought together this awesome group of experts who are kindly sharing their knowledge. So let's get started today by asking each of our panelists to briefly explain how they're currently using AI in their businesses. So Richard, would you mind getting us started off with AI at Sharesies?
Kia ora, everyone. Happy to. We have a few things going on with AI here. And it kind of breaks down into customer-facing and internal work. As you can imagine, with a fintech like ourselves, we're a quite heavily regulated space and need to take a great deal of care with people's financial understanding and their money, of course. So relatively cautious with a lot of this stuff. We have two key services that we provide through AI at the moment. Customer facing, we have an AI agent that helps our customer support team engage with our customers and answer their queries. And it's largely, you can think of it as just something that does all the reading of our knowledge base for you when you send in a question, and then gives you a response that's customized to your particular issue. So it can't answer things that the knowledge base wouldn't be able to answer itself. Those things still go back to our wonderful customer support team, but when it can answer that, it gives you, a much quicker answer, and one that our customers have really found very, very useful a lot of the time. Saves them a lot of time in reading and helps kind of bring all that knowledge to them. The other area is a thing called AI search, which is somewhat different from a regular search and kind of our first step into trying to provide the power of some of these tools to our customers. This search lets you propose a hypothesis. So in a normal search, you might type Apple, say, or computers to try and find companies that are related to that. With a hypothesis, you can say something like climate change is accelerating. And the AI will then build on that, tell you what it thinks you mean when you say that. And then, assuming that's the case, it can provide you with companies that you might want to look at, you might find interesting, that are relevant to that hypothesis, that perhaps working on various ways to address or mitigate issues in that space. Internally, we're focused on making AI tools generally available to our team. And this comes down to my firm belief that we, as people, are missing an intuition about how these work. These aren't regular software, and they're not people either. they're a new thing. They kind of sit in a different space, and we're not good at understanding how they behave and, importantly, how they fail. So our major goal here is to encourage our staff to use these, whether they're doing work things or just playing around, to help build that intuition and that understanding. And my focus mainly is looking at ways to give people magic moments, which helps encourage them to stay engaged and try and learn and use these tools. I will hand over to Catherine.
Kia ora koutou. Ngā tangata picked o Kotiarana, ngā tupuna o tōku mātua, no Yorkshire, no North Warwickshire ingarangi, ngā tupuna o tōku whaia, no Yorkshire ingarangi aho, e noho aho ki piha ki te wā nui a tiri wā kia tamaki makaurau. Ko GoodSense te ropu, ko Kath Dewar, tōku ingoa. And just like to honour Te Reo Māori. I'm a learner, so aroha mai to those fluent speakers for where I munched my pronunciation, but it's about giving it a go. Hey, it's always a pleasure to be in a crew of B Corps, whether we're digitally connected or in the same room. So he tata konui kia koutou for the hard work that you go through to be B Corps. In my pepehara, I talked about my dad, for whom my family name comes from Scotland. And he's a first-generation software developer. So he started coding in the 1960s, and I've been exposed and working with computers in many ways since I was literally 6-7 years old. So I might come across as a techno-skeptic in this corridor, but actually what you'll be hearing is my frustration at the squandering of potential and the rip, shit and bust attitude we have from multiple very rich, very powerful bad actors in this space at the moment. So that's probably important for context. The other thing that's important for context is the nature of our business. So at GoodSense, we exist to create more good outcomes in the world through how we help our clients be more effective in their marketing and communications. We very much work in the sustainability, science and systems change end of marketing. And so, for instance, we've worked with 5 national science challenges in the last couple of years. We work with tech companies for good, like Carbon EES down there in Wellington, and Catalyst Cloud, we did a big project work with for a while. And Method, where we helped Lee and the team launch the Internet of Things. And our work is very much at the art end of the spectrum, I guess. So it's creative collaboration where we co-design solutions with other human beings, and the intuitive leaps that we get when humans talk to each other. It's about complexity and multiple people, and it's about nuanced judgment. And we're often working with change makers who are quite vulnerable in the changes they advocate. So that's really important context, because our type of marketing isn't going, let's just relentlessly test different versions of Google AdWords to see if we can get a better result, you know. So at the moment, our policy is to be very deliberate about limiting very limited use. Like, we're not using AI at all on any client material, and our policy is precautionary learning. And that also reflects where our team are, because, you know, very different, Richard, like my team, where they've been trying AI tools out themselves, they're deeply pissed off and skeptical with how poor they are and how little quality they give them, and how actually just create more work, right? So our summary of a client call where we co-design stuff, it's very poor, because it doesn't have the nuance of the fact that as human beings we talk around subjects a lot. I want to, I think I've got 1 minute. I will talk about some of the tools that we're using, and I'll rattle some of those off. But I also just want to give us some examples for context that are really relevant to why we're skeptical. The first is that after 20 years of being a One New Zealand customer, we started to get statements through with the wrong address on, like completely around the country. This is like earlier this year. And then we got a statement for the period January 1970. So I have no idea if One New Zealand were applying AI to their data. But what I do know is that when Tony placed a call yesterday, my partner placed a call yesterday, he was told that the call was being recorded for training purposes and for AI. That's all they said. So he's trying to cancel our account because we're shifting to FarmSmart. But that, you know, we don't care too much what they're doing at that point. So another example that in the last year of 2023, 13,000 science papers were retracted from peer-reviewed journals because of found use of AI. So what we're seeing, the suspicion is the real number is 5 times that of papers that have been artificially created by bad actors, industrializing an overflow of junk science papers into peer-reviewed journals. So this stuff is hard to spot, right? And lastly, the Senate in Australia, an inquiry into what they're doing with privacy over there, under questioning of Facebook's global director, Meta's global director of privacy, got them to admit, on like the third time of asking, that they'd scraped all public Facebook pages in Australia to feed their AI. It meant to feed Meta's AI engine. We can assume the same has happened in New Zealand because we have the same kind of regulatory regime in place. I'm going to hand to you at this point, and I'll cover off our examples of the things that we're experimenting with and following with hot interest later.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Tēnei koutou katoa, ko Hugh Walcott, toka ingoa, ki te ono aki whanganui atara. So for my pepeha, I'd like to call out my mountain, which is pretty much all the Southern Alps. This is where I was 2 weeks ago. I'm a very huge fan of getting out and getting into the hills and connecting with nature, particularly when, you know, technology gets a little bit intense. Now, where I started my journey was back in '94. I graduated from electronic engineering from Canterbury, and I worked on power systems. And my breakthrough was 1996. I invented the LVD for large battery controllers. So this allowed us to work on much bigger battery systems, which eventually ended up designing and building the biggest switch mode power supply in the world back in 1997. Now, this is a 5,000 kilowatt rectifier, which was for the world's biggest data center back then, long time ago. Here we are celebrating our victory of actually making it work. But one of the things that really stood out for me, and you may see at the top of this image, a lot of sort of shiny material. There was a copious amount of copper that we put into this building. I'd never seen anything quite like this. You can see somebody's head underneath these bus bars. Each one of those blades is 1,000 amps, so this was transporting 10,000 amps around the building. And a lot of my job was actually about connecting the rectifiers through to the batteries before it would even go to the servers. And this was for essentially just in the order of 10,000 servers at that time. Today's data centers are hundreds of times bigger. They require hundreds of times more copper, more rectifiers, more diesel generators, more batteries the size of libraries, and have grown out of proportion and disconnected themselves from human values. And I've been watching the industry essentially be hijacked and turned into this weapon. For instance, the data center size, this is the average size of industrial data centers. Back in 1997, it was 500 kilowatts. We are now averaging 50 megawatts. We have over 700 data centers bigger than that, and we're looking at building a gigawatt data center in the next few years. And what has been driving that has been this advancing technology of supercomputers and supercomputes. In return, we've also seen the emissions from technology increase. And this was, I picked up on this back in 2019 when the digital sector collectively had overtaken global aviation. And a lot of the upward trend we're seeing in the overall emission profile of the digital sector is because of AI. So where I am now, I'm no longer working on data centers. I stopped that before the millennium, joined the technology of the software industry, became a software architect, then CTO, CIO. I've had several businesses using technology and exited out of those. Currently, I'm consulting across a number of organizations in ethical technology choices. I'm working with BNZ. I'm part of their governance and ethics committee for Gen AI. We've got 12 experiments that we're running. So our approach has been largely experiment. We're not implementing anything solid yet. We're very much in the learning phase, but we're both excited about the opportunity, but increasingly more aware of the concerns and risks. And I would call myself a skeptic as well at this point in time. But we know it's coming at us one way or another. We're seeing AI essentially by stealth appearing in so many of the tools we're already using across the bank and across other organizations as well. And I've also been involved in the cybersecurity side of AI. So that's my jam.
Thanks so much, Hugh, and all of our panelists. Apologies for the technical issues we've been having. The session is recorded, so we'll send it to everyone afterwards for anything that you've missed. For now, we'll get into the really juicy part of the conversation, and we'll start back with you. The question for the panelists is, there's a lot of discussions on the ethics of AI. What are the major considerations that value-led businesses like B Corp should be considering when thinking about generative AI for their businesses? So we'll start with you, Hugh.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm very much connected with the environmental ethics. I will share again some thoughts that I've been having in this space here. Just as a bit of a background, people may be aware that AI is not new. AI has been around for a long time. And I like this diagram from Our World in Data, which shows, and it's sorry about the small size of it, but the number of parameters on the left, how we've been increasing in size over time. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of exciting new models appear, but in that top right-hand corner in the yellow, that is where the large language models have really exceeded. They're all above 100 billion parameters in size, and they're now ranking in the order of human intelligence or above. So suddenly, as Richard pointed out, the skill set of AI has become, it's in its own category. It's not exactly comparable to humans, but it's doing a lot of the jobs that humans might do better, faster, but arguably with a lot more energy behind it. So yeah, look, interesting times ahead. And when you look at AI, you're looking at the productivity gains and the opportunities for your organizations, and you're hearing terms. I'm just going to pull out 3 of them: AI for climate, responsible AI, and AI safety. These are terms the industry is using to try and sort of wrangle in the concerns we have around the ethics and morality of a lot of the things that are going on under the hood. And largely these terms are sort of there to try and help guide us towards making a purchasing decision. But we know there's social risks with AI: data privacy, security, democracy. I'm not the best person to talk to those, but I have been stockpiling and understanding the environmental risks, and I'll talk to some of those and bring those together, because this is still evolving. We're still understanding, but we've been helped by a lot of wonderful AI engineers, scientists, and I'm going to call out Dr. Lucioni here from Hugging Face, one of the big providers of AI software and AI services and models. And they have measured a baseline for the carbon emissions for different models based on those AIs running inside California. Now, if you were to take, and what I liked about this graph was it had all the sort of typical use cases for AI, everything from text classification all the way down to image generation. And what was surprising was just how much bigger image generation was. So in the order of 1,000 times more energy than a text classification. So what you do with AI makes a big difference. And most of the use cases I see that are really going to hit home are really in the text side of the spectrum, the lower energy use cases. But that's not discounting the fact that people are still using AI to generate marketing material and videos even. And depending on where that AI runs, it could be, in the case of here, 1,000 kilograms of CO2, or if you're running it in Australia, it's going to be 3 times that. So it all adds up. It doesn't sound like much when you're talking about, a few watts here, a few kilograms there, but collectively, just go to the next slide. This is sort of an infographic of all the sort of areas where I think AI is having a material impact to the planet. So from the planet's perspective, from Papatūānuku's perspective, they're seeing rivers diverted into fabrication units for the manufacturing of the chips. They're seeing the minerals extracted, and I've highlighted some of the minerals here that are either toxic, rare, or associated with modern day slavery. I'm happy to talk about those more as well. But fundamentally, there is no real governance across the supply chain around AI. A lot of the material extraction is at the point of critical junction where we're not finding enough copper, for example, so we're having to recycle existing copper or dig deeper and go into even more dangerous territories as far as mineral extraction. But the key things that really stand out are the emission profiles. So AI is driven by servers. Some of the data centers that run AI have hundreds, millions of servers in them. The GPT-3 was built on a supercomputer of 10,000 GPUs, and a GPU is a special type of chip just for advanced programming like AI systems. But the GPT-4o was built on a supercomputer with 600,000 GPU. So a massive level of jump in magnitude of energy needed for the new, bigger models. Each server has a typical emission profile before it's even turned on in a data center of 4 to 8 tons of carbon. It's quite an energy intensive and high emitting supply chain for building a advanced computer server, as I'm sure you appreciated. And then the operating emissions. So if we're just looking at the number of servers that are currently running, sold by NVIDIA into racks around the world, most of the racks are in the United States. And based on the US emission factor, that would equate to 23,000 tons per day.
Wow, it's so crazy that the comprehension of that amount, and it's so amazing to be able to see it laid out like this. I'll now throw over to Kath. What's your perspective on this, especially you're talking about needing to consider your clients' privacy?
Yeah, well, I might touch a little bit about kind of because the social stuff, like always, and we know this as B Corps, is really wound tightly in with the environmental stuff. So if we just add to what Hugh was saying and thinking about climate alone, what do those numbers and that climate harm say when we think about just transition? So we have companies who have a lot of privilege, or businesses or people in the world who are now using AI to generate, what was it, a knitting cat I saw on Instagram the other day. Literally, it's a knitting cat, a badly done knitted cat, of course, because we're early still, but one day it will be a convincing knitted cat. And so when we think about climate justice and just transition, the social implications of that are massive. The framework we try and use when we're thinking about this stuff, because we always kind of try and work with our clients and on our own business to kind of have a strategy. So the starting point with it is looking at any AI implementation and going, who is gaining? And particularly in this sphere, looking at what is the corporate capture of private individual and company information that is going on, and what is the end game they're aiming for. So like trying to understand who the players are and their motives is really important when you're looking internally. Another is what data or information is being used to train the AI. So we talk about ChatGPT, for example, and how they are currently being sued by the New York Times because they just took all of those articles that journalists had researched painstakingly over years in many cases and fed it to train the engine. In Aotearoa, we have Te Tiriti considerations with things like Y262, which actually enchant the rights to knowledge of Indigenous data with our Indigenous people. And so, you know, where is that conversation going to take us here? And then you've got not only the bias of what things have been trained using, but also the amplified growing bias of who then uses it, gets the results, that's then fed in. Now, the key thing is how the data or the information is being captured. So I mentioned the Facebook scraping. We'd actually raised a complaint to the Privacy Commission, so GoodSense did this in June, because when the AI tools first appeared in all the Meta platform, it just kind of snuck in Australia and New Zealand. And so if before you knew it, you were putting in an AI search without even realizing you'd done it. And we were like, well, hang on a minute, what data is being scraped alongside that search or not? The privacy first tier said, yeah, there was an issue here, and we've heard nothing since. It's being investigated, and now we know through the Senate case that actually everything on public Facebook data pages was scraped. So there's a whole thing about transparency and about permission and providing opt-outs, which aren't happening at the moment. And they called to One New Zealand yesterday, another example. There's then the nature of the outputs that we hear a lot about. Yes, it's all derivative. Those knitting cats are clunky, but there's also a bloat that comes from that. And I talked about those science examples. So there's just all this poor stuff being churned out into the internet, which isn't actually making the world any better at all, and is just informing in what's going on. The faux sentiment is a real consideration to be thinking about. So, and especially the chat tools, they pretend to care, you know, whereas it doesn't care. It is just a smart computer. It's not a new form of life. So it really doesn't care. It doesn't have emotion, and it you know, you can fake emotion, but it hasn't got it. We're not at the singularity yet, you know. The false information, the authoritative inaccuracy. So it can be bullshit, but it sounds like it's not. That's dangerous. And the unanchored, it's out of context. So you're not getting any limits. And then we've got the impact on the users. So mental health, personal safety, those are really real concerns. And also the social fragmentation, the democratic decline that's being accelerated and deliberately accelerated. You know, this stuff we've got to stop assuming this is a benign thing. There's a lot of bad actor use because it gives them quick results. And of course, the context for that overall is a systemic governance vacuum and a very fast failing happening at a global level. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that the big tech companies of all kinds who have access to public data where they can put an AI in their app, they've done it to train their AIs as fast as possible from as much data as possible before the regulations catch up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've seen a lot of that, haven't we?
Yeah.
Right, there's so much to discuss here. I'll just pass over to Richard. What were you thinking about at Sharesies when it comes to AI?
Yeah. I mean, Catherine Hugh raised some really good and really key points, and I think my reflection on some of those, in particular, you know, the numbers that Hugh shared, he shared those with us before this in an email, and I was looking through that, and we started talking about some of the numbers and how we got there with various assumptions and stuff like that. And I sat back after that conversation, and my reflection was, not only are the numbers deeply concerning, but the reflection from me was, we don't even know what the real numbers are. We have to, in order to be able to make good decisions about how we do this stuff, you know, in order for everybody in the world to be able to make good decisions, we need good information. And we are not sufficiently motivating the organizations that have this information to share it in a form that we can actually use to make those judgments well. We're having to make these massive guesses. We don't know whether we're high or low. We've got no way of getting concrete. Not to take away from the incredible effort that people like you are putting in to try and quantify this with as much information as they have. But we can do better, and we need to put pressure on to do better. There is, you know, absolute work on data centers to try and provide good information around this. But again, you provided another link to an article where they're all kind of stepping around in scope 2 and scope 3 and like dodging things. You know, everybody deserves to have concrete information. information about this.
And that's the public as well, right, Richard? Because people have no idea. So I had a lovely older friend. They retired. They do all this volunteer work in the community gardens. They cycle everywhere. They went vegan a few years ago in their late 60s, all for the climate, for their mokopuna, right? And she put out on Messenger, we've been having fun with all the memes about eating cats and dogs, out of the States. And this is what ChatGPT told us about it. And I was kind of like, there's just no awareness about how brutal the environmental impact of this is. I mean, the social stuff there's some, but there's virtually none on the environmental. So it's kind of seen as just kind of fun and lols as at this stage, And so that lack of public awareness and the privacy stuff on top. So
and I'm just going to reiterate that AI is already a giant environmental catastrophe, and a lot of the rhetoric we're hearing about how AI can be good for the climate and good for the environment is just that. It hasn't actually amounted to a huge amount in regards to actual improvement or redirecting some of the bad behaviors of humans in the past, but it is actually making and accelerating our path towards environmental destruction and catastrophe.
Yeah, super fast. We're intelligent humans, right? And we have kind of things that no tools yet have. We have empathy for each other. We have imagination. We have incredible capacity to do good stuff. And so I'm really excited about when Lee suggested this conversation about our collective power, not just our individual power as B Corps, but our collective power to start advocate for change. And just last month, the Spanish representative of the World, I always get it the wrong way around, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, a company called Foretica, they put together an AI manifesto. So, this is one of the things we might like to start looking at as a framework potentially. They're an ESG advisory company, and their 5-point framework says that any AI should be should be creating, or any AI use should be climate zero. Anything from a climate position should be net zero, that it needs to be advancing nature recovery goals. This is 5 points. The thirdly, that needs to be ethical, transparent, and trustworthy. And I think the trustworthy is really important. Like, it's very different. That's not trusted, because the public trusts things they really shouldn't trust. There's a lack of information, right? Trustworthy, that it should help advance inclusivity, diversity, and equality. And that AI should also be busting full of good governance practices. So, from a big corp perspective, we might add to that something around economic systems change, which I think is probably at a deeper, broader level than those. But I felt that was a step in the right direction. And if we start to apply our thinking on those, that might be a useful tool to inform some of what we can be doing in our businesses as we move forward.
Awesome. We'll circle back to more advice for B Corps at the end. Richard?
Yeah, just quickly, I think very easy for us to feel a bit doom and gloom about a lot of this. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot to feel doom and gloom about. But I'd also like to call out some elements that are just easy to overlook in the general thing. We've the companies, people like OpenAI and things, have been talking about safety and alignment, and we know to an extent that they oversell those elements and the impacts of them. But I do want to call out the fact that the level of attention that has been paid there has definitely mitigated some of the ways that this could have gone wrong right out the gate. If you spend some time talking to an AI chatbot like ChatGPT or something like that, currently, and as a direct result of the training and the great work that the safety teams, not always well supported in those organizations, have done, is they do tend to mimic a respectful engagement with people. The language choices, the way that they redirect conversations and things like that can be, ideally people would be having conversations with other people when they're feeling stressed or things like that. But when you do engage with a chatbot under those circumstances, a bit mimicking, they are at least tending towards providing the sorts of responses that we might hope that a person would provide in those, often quite supportive, often listening, often mimicking that empathetic tone. And I don't think we can underestimate the importance of that as a scene setting thing. I don't want to mistake this for it being anything near perfect, but it does give me a bit of hope that we recognize the importance of this in terms of human interaction. These tools are not the same as buttons. They the way that you talk with them, the way that you interact with them will reflect on how you engage in future with people. And so the fact that people have put substantial effort into this is really important to me, and definitely gives me some hope that we are not yet in a place where we've lost everything, right? We've got a chance to reinforce those efforts rather than have to turn the entire ship around.
Yeah,
That
sure.
makes so much sense.
That's really important. I do just think that we need to bear in mind that, and obviously each individual deployment matters. And I'm not suggesting that Sharesies chat does anything other than trying to get the quickest answer to people in the right way. But we also know that some chatbots and some participation in AI tools is deliberately structured to be very, very hyper addictive, added on to the hyper addictive context of social media, for example. And so, yes, of course, they've been programmed to kind of be empathetic and reasonable because they kind of want to keep you hooked in. So I just, yes, and I think, and and still to hope, because we've got lots of potential. But
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's come clear through this, Hugh said at the start, it's coming at us whether we want to or not. And all of these concerns are incredibly valid and very real. And particularly with this audience we've got here, there's no questions in the chat yet, so I'll just keep the corridor going on because there's so much great stuff in here. So I guess the question for the panel is that we've got values-based businesses, people that want to do good, use the best tools. How do they navigate this space? How do they move forward to be competitive while maintaining ethical standards and being able to leverage tools that are available to them like AI? Start with you, Richard, on that one.
Yeah, cool. So my mantra, this is absolutely my mantra, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. The key thing for me is I need to get people using it so that they understand everyone needs good information in order to make good judgments. I trust in the judgment of all the people at Sharesies to look out for our customers. That's what they're there for, and that's what they do every day in every decision that they make. I can't babysit them through that, what that means is I need to get them as quickly as possible with such a new and incredibly complex technology. I need them to get to the point where they can make good, balanced decisions around these tools. And everything that we've been talking about today, I think, really feeds into that. How do we make sure that they're aware of the impacts of the choices that they're making? We talk about things of bias. We built a governance structure within the organization right out the gate before we deployed anything, so that we had all these things there under consideration. Every AI tool that comes into Sharesies, it involves a review process. You need to write up a whole thing that talks about all the various elements of it, data protection, all the questions around training, and all of those things, so that we're never doing something by accident. Always with as much good information as we've got. So that's my view, is when you empower everybody to make good judgments about this stuff, and this belief floats all the way to the level of Sharesies and how we treat our customers, right? When we empower everybody with that, then we will make those good balanced judgments where we can actually get the value from these tools that they potentially represent, while minimizing or recognizing or mitigating the costs as best we can. Ultimately, Sharesies is only so big and it can only do so much, but that's the key thing for me. I might bounce to Catherine.
Kia ora. I mean, as a marketer, I would be remiss if I didn't say start with what is in your customer's interest. It might be useful to have a look. In June this year, Ipsos produced some research looking at New Zealanders' attitudes compared to other attitudes around AI. 66% of Kiwis said they were nervous about the use of AI as opposed to 44% who are excited. So, and the global average is about 50-50. So Kiwis are, you know, we're being a bit skeptical about it overall. So that's worth looking at in terms of customer base. 54% of New Zealanders think that AI is going to make fake information worse in the coming years. And 57% don't trust AI not to be using discrimination and bias. So you've got to put your customers' interests at the heart. And I would advocate for really clear transparency as a real starting point, and opting in, because you've got to look at the reputation and the rewards. So if your main goal as an organization is to learn what's going on, then maybe don't be feeding customer data into that learning. Maybe look at some other ways of doing it. And we've also got to bear in mind that in Aotearoa, 97% of our businesses are 10 or fewer staff, right? So they're using the public tools. They're not doing what the big tech companies do, which is go, do not use ChatGPT on your phone, Mr. Major tech company of the world, whose name I shan't mention because my mate who works there told me about this. They're not allowed to use them, right? They're only allowed to use their own proprietary AI on private client data that they're doing with in a special setup. So I think that, bearing in mind the public risk, knowledge is power. Totally, Richard is absolutely right. We've got to learn. We've got to find ways of learning. Develop policies that we can use, be active, proactive about it. And like I say, ours is precautionary learning, but not at client's expense. And the third is processes for practice. And I think, you know, we could do worse than look at what is the spirited intent of the Privacy Act in New Zealand. How can we be very clear using plain language about what AI we're using, how we're using it, how it's going to benefit us, not bullshitting the customer about what they're getting out of it, because the chances are it's going to take a long time before probably not a long time in advances. It's going to take a while before they get any individual benefit out of the collective learning that the machine learning is going through. And I would advocate for opt-in. So it would have been a much better experience from One New Zealand yesterday if Tony had the option of going, do you want to opt in to feed AI? Click here for more information, click here to opt out, you know. But he was pushed into, then he was asked to give his PIN number. Literally the next question. This is One New Zealand. So how many you know, millions of data points? And then the fourth is, I think we need to get organized and start advocating for good standards and supporting public education. There's a community education hub in Nelson. I think it's the first in the world. They're doing it as a drop-in center for AI. You can rock in, go and learn the risks, learn how to use stuff, give it a go in a safe environment, book a slot if you want. And I think that's fantastic that's happening here. But I'd love to see those publicly funded in every small town and village the length and breadth of Aotearoa, you know, and in every school, so that people actually do get to learn.
I think this question is probably a good lead into what Hugh's probably about to say anyway, so I might just read it out. And this is from Shelley Herbert. And in terms of AI governance, is the panel seeing any companies consider sustainability in AI impact assessments and or have sustainability representative on AI working groups, which I believe is largely what you do work on.
That's essentially Silver Lining trying to close the gap between corporate sustainability and technology. And the two are very separate at the moment. It's like you could drive a bus between them. And what we're trying to do is just get some of those key measurements and metrics back up into the steering committees and into the governance boards. So I've been working on essentially a digital carbon footprint capability, and it's a set of tools and processes. And I've been working with initially a bunch of smaller organizations that work in the digital or technology space. And some of those have been hugely successful. I saw one company that pretty much everyone in New Zealand hosts in Australia. All their AWS, Google, Microsoft Azure, everything is, all the big tech is in Australia. And it's probably not surprising to most people in this call that Australia has one of the dirtiest power grids in the world. It's probably 8 times bigger than New Zealand, you know, 3 times bigger than a lot of the US. It's 80% brown coal in most cases. And why is we as Aotearoa entrusting Australia with what is essentially our data sovereignty and our server farms. So just by measuring it, fortunately, all the tech providers provide usage-based billing. It's either kilowatt, terabyte hours, or virtual CPU months, and even AI. AI is falling into two camps as far as the type of procurements that you've got. You can get credits that you pay for advance, or you pay by usage. And both of those metrics that are used in billing can also be used to provide you with a baseline measurement of what your impacts are. And as soon as we surface those numbers, we're seeing customers move generally non-production first, but oddly enough, non-production is more than production as far as emissions. You've got more test environments, more dev environments, more non-production environments of different sorts than you do have production. And just by moving your non-production out of Australia into a low carbon zone, which is in many cases one line of Terraform code, it's really quite straightforward to do. You can eliminate or reduce your digital carbon footprint 40–60%. Now, why are people not doing that more often? I don't know. So what I've been advocating is a measure, mitigate, disclose, three-step process. The engineers you have in your businesses, the people that are actually involved with the procurement of IT, they know what to do. They haven't been given the mandate to actually go and measure. Now, as company leaders, company and IT leaders, we should be asking for the numbers from our providers. Invariably, they're greenwashing at this point in time. And if we can't get the numbers from our providers, we should go to our billing tools and use some of the open source tools that are out there to be able to estimate our emissions, our footprints, and then close the gap between technology and corporate sustainability.
Absolutely. It all comes down to data, right? How much do we know about what's actually happening? And often there are technical ways to reduce these impacts that people just aren't actively working on.
Yeah.
So I've got one other question, and then I might give you each chance for closing remarks as people move on to their days. So from SilverLining.eco, apologies if I said that incorrectly. We're moving out of Australia to low carbon environments. Where does this land? I can see Kath has popped in an example there, but has anyone else got any advice on this?
I'm interpreting the question as we move the technology out of Australia. So which country or which location does it land in? And I think the key thing for me when we talk about that is it's about two elements. I think the first is the country, the legislative environment, the data sovereignty elements of that consideration. And then the second part of it is about the data center or data centers, usually, because the nature of these things, especially if you're talking a production context, is that you can't rely on a single one. The data centers have, very different profiles in terms of how they source their power, how they treat their cooling water, and how recent or old the technology and stuff is. So there's quite a lot of investigation required when you're making those moves to make sure that you're maximizing the benefit of it. It's easier depending on the nature of where you're based. If you're based, I believe Azure has a New Zealand and Auckland DC or zone, whereas AWS does not currently have a New Zealand-based zone. If you've invested heavily in the fabric of those systems, the migration can actually be extremely challenging and sometimes difficult to maintain. So there's quite a lot of work, I think, that goes into it, and I'm very heartened by the presence of Hugh, who I feel like him and his organization would be one of the go-to people if you were considering doing that, to make sure you maximize and don't accidentally end up transferring to a data center that ultimately doesn't have a different profile. But then on the data sovereignty side, of course, it's much easier to judge because you end up in the jurisdiction that you thought you would.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll just add to that. Exactly that, Richard. Thinking about the data sovereignty and the data centers, a lot of clients that are obviously New Zealand, Australia based feel like Singapore, you can halve your digital emissions just by moving to Singapore. Obviously, there's other concerns with the data center in Singapore. Otherwise, test and on-prod, the European data centers are pretty much all nuclear. whether you're pro or against nuclear, but it does emits less in operating emissions at least. And then a call out to Catalyst Cloud. They've innovated and have come out with a GPU by the hour type of infrastructure, so you can get your NVIDIA chips in New Zealand and on New Zealand soil. And I'd like to see people move to that. It's really hard for companies like Catalyst Cloud to go up against AWS and Azure, but they offer a good product there as well. And there's Microsoft Azure, which is, I believe, opening in Auckland. I don't think it's actually running yet. I could be wrong, but it's principally just for government cloud, and it's got a subset of what Auckland does. A subset of what Australia does. Australia is way ahead. They've got many times the data center capacity than New Zealand does. They've invested early, and some of their data centers are huge by comparison, and have all the products. So New Zealand is 10 years behind Australia on data centers.
There's so much growth to happen. I want to thank you all of our panelists. Again, I'll give you 1 more minute for closing remarks. But I just want to thank you again for coming and sharing your knowledge so freely. It's been such an awesome conversation, and be able to see the different sides. Obviously, there's so much more that could be said, and I highly encourage you to go and follow each of these leaders on LinkedIn, because I've seen all of their awesome educational content that they share regularly and so freely. If you're looking to improve the way you communicate about sustainability, and particularly around AI, highly recommend reaching out to GoodSense. As Kath said, have worked with them in the past and stand by their work 100%. If you're looking to decarbonise, obviously speak to Hugh. He's got infinite amounts of wisdom, and SilverLining is such a great business that needs to continue growing, so that these conversations can be really productive and have really clear outputs. And of course, I can't say good enough things about Sharesies and the work that they're doing, and what Richard brings to the tech sector. And I highly recommend following the work that they're doing, and making investing more accessible for everyone. So yeah, I'll give you each a minute. What's your closing remarks for these people going into their day? It's been such a big conversation. What's the one thing you want them to take away today? We'll start with you, if that's all right.
We'll start with me. I am really looking forward to working with New Zealand businesses and corporates in closing the gap between sustainability and corporate sustainability and technology. A lot of wealth, knowledge that I can bring to the table. So yeah, reach out, as you said, available to help.
Kia ora.
Kath?
Kia ora. I just want to say thank you for today. It's really good. I've been feeling like quite a bit kind of like of an outlier, isolated, because most of my industry is like, yeah, we lie. Let's make knitted cats and sell shit that we don't need, that goes to landfill, that burns the planet. So it's really nice to be among friends, you know. And I think there's quite a tension to hold between hope and frustration stroke cynicism, you know. Like, I think navigating that middle ground is really interesting. I think we've probably not been great as a species in unleashing the good side of social media, for example, and I'm kind of wondering if we're a little bit once bitten twice shy. I don't know whether we're going to get it right again, but I think if we can show leadership together collectively as B Corps, there's some real power in that. I'd like to see us maybe collectively advocating for the Privacy Commission to get its shit together on this stuff here. I'd like to be advocating collectively for the government to start to take this seriously, even at a privacy level, the way the Senate is in Australia. And I think we could also be asking B Lab what their plans are for implementing some frameworks into the new B Corp standards for this, because they're going to be in place really soon, and I don't know whether or not they include AI as a consideration from an ethical and an environmental perspective. And knowledge is power, right? Like, just keep supporting each other to learn and explore this stuff.
Kia ora. Richard.
Yeah, knowledge is power. If I had one message that I would like you all to take away from this, it is don't ignore it. We can't predict the future, and we don't know where this is going or how it will impact 5 years from now. This whole thing has largely caught us by surprise. And I believe that we have a responsibility to our customers, to our future generations, to make this the best that we can and mitigate the harms as best we can. And my personal belief is we can only do that if we understand it. And there's nobody who can tell you at the moment. All of those people who say they're experts, and I admit that sometimes people try and call me an expert, and I will say that I am not firmly, is they still don't know exactly how this is going to play out. The best we can do is understand it by using it, but also recognizing all the things we've talked about today about how you do that carefully and responsibly, sustainably. So yeah, please take that away from me, and thank you all for coming and listening to this, because that's, you know, that's a key part of it. We don't get off the ground unless people engage.
Kia ora. Thank you so much. We'll send out the recording afterwards for anyone that missed the beginning, but let us know if you're interested in more of this content in the future. And thanks again to Sam and Cassidy of Be Wellly Local for pulling it together. Have an amazing day. Ka kite.
Thank you,
You
Tia.
too.
See you later.
Sparkles.
I love the little like, it's amazing how small changes to systems like this can make such a difference to interactions.